today is a bit of an experiment. I wanted to make something out of polymer clay and I was kind of overthinking it, so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to make something for myself. And I wrote down a plan of what I was going to make, but actually what I ended up doing was making a kind of white base and then using these drilling shavings to make a textured pattern in the clay, which ended up being quite cool, and I'll show you now. My first job is to clean the pasta machine. So here I'm using a J cloth to wipe the rollers above and below. I'm also going to use a piece of scrap white clay to pass through the machine to pick up any loose bits of other coloured clay that might still be in the machine. I make sure I pass the scrap clay through the whole length of the roller, so making sure I do the outer edges of the roller as well. I have a small block of white clay which I'm going to heat in my hands to soften a little bit, and then use a roller. Whoops, but then it likes to jump away. So I use a roller to roll out this clay. It's an acrylic roller. The surface that I'm rolling the clay onto is a black marble tile, which is great because it's a nice smooth surface that the clay doesn't stick to. So here I'm turning the clay around, rolling it in different directions, turning it over, and then I also use the pasta machine to roll the clay out more and soften it. I'm using a craft knife to scrape out any little bits of dirt and debris that you sometimes get embedded in the clay. So there's a little bit of scrap clay there as well that I will just wipe the blade on. You can also use a cotton bud and isopropyl alcohol to wipe a thin layer of the surface of the clay away, which will remove any dust and fluff as well. But this is just as easy to scrape away a bit of the surface there. One of the mistakes I made was rolling the clay out way too thin, so I thought I'd include that and show you. So even though I've been doing this for many years, I still make mistakes like gauging the thickness of the clay coming out of the pasta machine. So it's no problem though, because I just folded it and then rolled it through on a thicker setting and then just kept folding it until it was the right thickness that I needed. For earrings I normally do a thickness of about 3mm. This is a pot of drilling shavings from when I drill holes in my polymer clay earrings. It's all different colours and it's really nice. It's like confetti. Sometimes you get the curls in it, but I think this pot is just full of lots of little bits. So I'm sprinkling that over the clay to make a pattern, and it's also got a really nice texture. I'm going to use a knife to remove any little bits of dirt or little bits of wood that were in it. It's actually quite a good way to disguise any of the little fibres and dust that sometimes land on the clay as well. So using this sort of texture disguises a lot of those imperfections. I'm using a roller to roll out the surface a little bit and turning it over and picking up all the loose bits. So yeah, I really like this textured pattern. It's kind of like, I don't know, I suppose a granite sort of pattern, but in multicolours, and it's really nice. So rolling it out, seeing if I like it. There's also a texture that I love on this little glass candle holder. So I'm rolling that out. I've used this texture before on some of my stud earrings, which I really love. So I'm just checking out to see what it looks like on top of this kind of pattern. But I'm not sure it kind of goes together because I've already got the texture from the drilling shavings and all the colours there. So I've decided to kind of just roll that out and have a flat surface because I think it's already got enough texture from the little bits of colour that I've put in there already. So I'm using the pasta machine to roll this out and checking there's no big bits of dirt in it or anything, again using the knife to remove anything that I don't want in there. I'm adding a little bit more of the drilling shavings because I feel like it needs a bit more on the surface now because I've also rolled it through the pasta machine, so it's embedded a lot of the particles into the clay. So just checking to see if I like the look of it, folding it over. I'm trying to get an even distribution of the pieces throughout the clay. Now that I like the distribution of the little pieces of shavings, I'm going to use my 3mm depth guide. So I made these myself using a laser cutter, and yeah, so each piece of acrylic ruler is 3mm, so that helps me roll the piece of clay evenly to that depth. So I'm adding just a little bit more of the drilling shavings to the surface, and then rolling that out to the depth of 3mm using the depth guides. That keeps it nice and even, which is perfect for making earrings, as it makes sure the thickness is equal for each component of the earrings. And I give it another little roll. I'm ready to start cutting earring components, so I've chosen a circle cutter first of all to make a stud. The clay actually has quite a lot of bits in it, so I have to press quite hard with the cutters, and I know already just from the texture that I'm going to have a lot of rough edges on the circumference of that circle. That's my box of clay cutters that I've collected over time, and I'm just choosing pieces now to make my earring components. I'm thinking about how I'm going to assemble them once they're baked. In the left of my cutters box, I've got cutters made from Coke cans. So when I first started with making polymer clay jewellery, I wasn't sure if I wanted to invest a lot of money in cutters because I wasn't sure if I was going to like the styles, and I didn't want to do the same as everyone else, so I wanted a way to custom make my own cutters really cheaply, and that really worked well at the start. And then I moved on to designing my own earring pieces like this bat wing shape, and I asked somebody to 3D print them for me, so that was a fun process of designing my own earring shapes. I love the jelly bean shape that you can see there, so I end up using that one as the middle component of my earrings as well. I'm using a mini circle cutter here. As I'm cutting shapes out of the clay, I'm also thinking ahead to when I assemble the earrings and what kind of combination of components I'd like to use for the final earrings. So I do have something in my mind where I'm going to do like a main stud top and then the middle jelly bean, but with 3 kind of drop components, so either teardrop shapes or circles. In the end I went with teardrop shapes. That's kind of my favourite. I kind of like having a little bit of the dangle there because it's like a little fringe with 3 components on each earring. So I'm continuing to press the pieces into the clay. I like trying to get as many shapes out of a small piece of clay as I can. With the teardrop shape, I turn it around to try and fit in as many cuts as I can into the clay. So I continue doing this until I've cut out all of the shapes I can out of this piece of clay. This is one of my favourite parts, so I'm going to do what's called a skeleton peel. So I'm hoping this comes out in one go. So I'm carefully removing the excess clay, which I will also reuse. So I reuse the leftovers from my leftovers. That's a really nice skeleton peel there. I'm going to pick up each component of earring and smooth the edges because there's little bits of the drilling shavings poking out. This is the baking tray that I bake my polymer clay pieces on. It's got a piece of copier paper on top and a bit of card, and I've got 2 ceramic tiles underneath. So that's a foil baking tray that you can buy from the supermarket. You don't need to put the extra cardboard layer in, you can just put the paper on top of the tiles. That stops getting a shiny surface on the back of your earrings. As I'm putting the earrings into the tray, I'm also smoothing the edges because that saves a lot of time sanding once the earrings are baked. And especially with this technique I've used, using the drilling shavings, there's quite a few little bits of polymer clay that are sticking out of the side, so I need to smooth them quite well. I'm using my tissue blade to pick up some of the pieces that have got stuck to the tile. and it just helps really, because sometimes you can distort the clay if you use your fingers to pick it up from the tile. So I like to use a tissue blade to kind of scoop them up. Makes it a lot easier. So again, I'm smoothing the sides before I put them into the tray. It will save a lot of time sanding in the future, so it's worth taking the time to do that now. So here are the pieces ready to bake on my tray. So I've got quite a few pieces out of that small piece of clay. I'm really pleased with that. The leftover clay I'm going to scrunch up, and I'm going to reuse this as well, so I don't waste anything. I keep everything. Even grey coloured clay, when it goes all a funny colour, I will mix that up and I can apply mica to the top of it, or I can even paint it once it's baked. There are a lot of things that I can do with clay that's not the right kind of colour for what I need. I'm cleaning things now, so I'm being very good at cleaning my cutters straight after I've used them, because then that saves any colour transferring onto the next pieces that I'm making. Top tip from another polymer clay maker was to use a scrap bit of clay to just wipe up your surface, so that picks up any loose bits of clay. It's really helpful. And you can also swipe it across the blade to pick up any loose bits of clay, because it's really annoying when you've got a fresh colour of clay and then, you know, I might end up with little white dots in my new piece. So that's why I spend a lot of time cleaning the surface and cleaning the tools. So I'm rolling out another piece of the white clay there. So this has got the texture embedded into it. I have some black and white stripy clay that I made previously for another collection, so I'm going to use this to decorate the surface of the clay with all the drilling shavings in. So I store it in these little bags, just getting it out of the bag there. So the colours are nice and crisp. I love black and white stripes. I'm rolling my clay out to a 3mm thickness, getting it ready. In hindsight, I should have probably done it a bit shallower, because I was going to lay some thicker texture pieces on top, but that's all fine because I kind of burnish it down to the right thickness anyway in the end. I'm using my tissue blade to thinly slice little slices of black and white clay, which I'm going to lay on top of the white base. So I'm doing it really, I don't know how many millimeters, but they're very tiny, so the smallest slices that I can do. Then I'm going to slice them into almost sort of cube shapes, because I'm going to lay them across the clay in various patterns to decorate the surface. And they do break into little chunks because I've had this cane for quite a while, but it still works. I'm positioning them across the surface so it looks the best, to make a random pattern. I cut more pieces of the cane and add more stripes to decorate the surface until I get the look that I like the best. So what I do, I turn the whole piece of clay around. You can put the base of the clay onto greaseproof paper if that makes it easier to turn around, but I usually just slice under with the blade to turn it around if it does get stuck. Then that gives you like a really good view. You can make sure that you're not just placing the pieces in one direction all the time, so it gives it a really good even kind of covering, and all the pieces will be in different directions. So I'm cleaning my hands because sometimes the black colour transfers onto the white as I'm putting pieces down, so I have to keep my hands clean, so I keep wiping them. Once I'm happy with the design, the next step is to burnish the surface. So I'm using greaseproof paper here and a roller, and just rubbing backwards and forwards and across, just to get the texture down a bit as well, but also it's just so it doesn't distort the image, distort the pattern that I've got there. If I was just to put it through the pasta machine, it would distort the pattern really badly, and I kind of want to keep the stripes there. That's why I use this method. And also I keep the guides there so I kind of know when to stop burnishing if I get carried away and go too shallow. I'm selecting cutters now, so deciding which sort of shapes I'd like to use to make my earrings. I'm using one of the previous pieces I've cut as a guide to make sure I'm using the correct circle cutter, because I might alternate the patterns of the earrings within one design, if that makes sense. So I might have a stud top with this stripy pattern, and then a middle part with just the drilled shaving texture pattern, and then the bottom part I will do in the black and white. If you can't get the pieces out of the cutter, just use the end of a brush to push the piece out. I've cut my earring components and I'm just smoothing the edges and placing them on the baking tray. It's time to clean up, so I'm cleaning all of the clay off of the rollers there with a J cloth. I wipe down all of the tools that I've used, including the depth guide, so little bits of clay tend to stick to that. I clean all of my cutters as well before I put them away. It just saves me having to do that when I next open this box, so at least I know they're ready to go. I clean off my tissue blade as well before I pack that away. Then we're all done. Here are the polymer clay components I've made, and it's from using leftover drilling shavings and leftover black and white stripy clay that I had. So I hope you can see how you can use leftover polymer clay in different ways.